On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Kleberg Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. From Austin Film Festival, this is On Story, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers, creators, and filmmakers. This week's On Story, comedy writer and The Simpsons co-executive producer, Dana Gould.
You do write what you know. I mean, people say, like, when is the show going to run out of ideas? Well, as long as people live their life, you're going to have ideas. And I can look at every episode that I wrote and tell you what was going on in my life at that time, because it reflects it inevitably.
In this episode, Dana Gould discusses writing for television's longest-running scripted series, The Simpsons, and creating the horror comedy series, Stand Against Evil.
I started as a comedian, and I was a hot young talent at the height of the era where they would just give you development deals to come up with, because Seinfeld was on and was a big hit. And so, like, you're the next Seinfeld. There's $35,000. And I had a bunch of pilots. Dana, Nice Try, the appropriately named Nice Try, created by Linwood Boomer, who went on to do Malcolm in the Middle. And I've had my hand in more failed pilots than an Air Force proctologist. And I found I enjoyed writing. I like the process, and I've been doing comedy for a long time by that time, and I was just about to get married, and not long after that, George Meyer, who was a friend of mine, was writer on The Simpsons, said, "I heard you were thinking about doing some writing stuff. Would you like to come into The Simpsons for like a day a week, and just kind of punch up jokes?" Because he knew me as a stand-up, and I was like, yeah, and which is really like, if you ever see the movie Let It Be, when Billy Preston comes in to jam with the Beatles, he's like, okay, I'll just sit here and play with you guys. That's what it's like your first day of The Simpsons. Like, all right, here we go. And I worked there a day a week for a while, just kind of punching up jokes. And it took, several months before I figured out the algorithm of the show. And then one day, Mike Scully, who was running the show, came in the morning and he said, I think your contract is up. And I was like, oh, God. And I was like clearing out my stuff, like, I'm so sorry. And I'll put my coffee back. And he said, do you want to just come every day? And I said, yeah. And he said, I'll never forget it. He said, all right, I'll call your agent. And then he went, sucker. And that was it. I was there for like 7 years.
Can you talk about how that process went for you? You're now a new full writer in there, and you're going to pitch your show to the crew. How did you break that?
You have to understand, most of the people in that room, not all of them, but a lot of them are guys that went to Harvard. They wrote on the Harvard Lampoon. Then they worked on Letterman or SNL. And then they came out and worked on The Simpsons. And that was like a very standard trajectory for people. And I was a dropout of the University of Massachusetts who was a stand-up comedian. So to them, I was a carny. And I had been I had a lot of success. When I decided to become a writer, I'd been on Seinfeld, I'd been in the cast of a sitcom, I'd been on Letterman, I had a good career. And then, I was in my 30s, I was like, I got married, I bought a house, and now I'm gonna be a grown-up, and I'm gonna have a job with I had a card and an office and a place where I park, and felt like a grown-up. And And then you go in that room and you really have to just like, please leave your ego in the car because they don't care. So you're pitching a story, and the great thing about The Simpsons, as I said, the show has certain algorithms, and the way the stories are designed are, at least when I was there, it's three acts. And this is something that I have taken, it's like the first act is a freestanding story that has nothing to do with the story. The first act is like an opening sketch. The story starts at the end of the first act, the beginning of the second act. You do your story in the second act, and in the third act, you turn it as hard as you can without breaking it. And that came from my experience in the room, came from George Meyer, and who would say, and again, I've taken this, stolen it, surprise being the best weapon and the most facile tool in the comedian's toolbox. You do write what you know. I mean, people say, like, when is the show going to run out of ideas? Well, as long as people live their life, you're going to have ideas. And I can look at every episode that I wrote and tell you what was going on in my life at that time, because it reflects it inevitably. My dad was a bartender and a hunter. So my first episode was about bartending and hunting. You basically write down stuff. You have a couple of days where you come up with a general idea. You come up with an idea. Homer runs a bar. This happens, this happens, this happens. And then you sit with the other writers and you just sort of airball ideas that can go into the episode. I had gone to the W Hotel in New York. And I was in the men's room, but I didn't realize I was in the men's room because the W Hotel in New York is an orgasm of style over function. And I went into the men's room, and then I was just in this room with bare walls that had a waterfall against one wall. And I was looking for the door into the bathroom, and then somebody else came in, started pissing against the waterfall, and then a guy who had just walked out of the wall that had a toilet behind it. I was like, it was just why you would disguise a bathroom when you're inside a bathroom. We're all in there for the same reasons. So we thought, well, it'd be funny if Mo did that to the bar, if Mo completely renovated Mo's in that regard. And so he turned Mo's into M. And so I pitched it, and it evolved. Like we had the general idea of Homer taking over the bar. That's funny. Then we'll go to the bartending school with Mo, and then it was like, well, where do you want to take it? Where do you want to take it? And I had an original ending that they threw away, and we came up. I forget what it was, but we were just talking about other ideas, and we came up with the hunting thing. So that's how we ended up with them going hunting. And then it was just one of those things where, hey, REM wants to do the show. Oh, okay. Well, maybe they can play at the bar. Okay. So now we have to schedule REM, and we have to fit REM into the script. And they can Frankenstein their way along.
Welcome to M, huh? So, what do you think of the new joint?
Oh, this place looks like it's from the not-too-distant future.
Yeah, you like it, Homer?
The rabbits are cute.
That one ain't moving.
Change number 7.
I don't get all this eyeball stuff. What are they supposed to represent? Eyeballs?
It's Po-Mo. Postmodern. Yeah, all right. Weird for the sake of weird.
Oh.
That particular episode is I think it's not my favorite that I wrote, but I think it's the funniest that I wrote.
So which is the favorite episode that you wrote?
The favorite episode I wrote, again, as I said, you can see where I am in my life by what I'm writing, was called Goo Goo Gai Pan. And it was when they went to China to adopt a baby for Selma. I had just come back from adopting a baby in China and thought, well, there's some interesting stuff here. And that unlike Homer the Moe, that story flows very organically, and obviously it has an emotional connection to it. And the baby, Ling Bouvier, who I believe is still on the show occasionally, is my daughter Lulu, and she's designed on her baby picture. And so one day, my daughter Lulu, who's now in her teens, was watching The Simpsons, and she came on, and I went, "Oh, honey, that's you," and she just goes, "Yeah." I go, "No, honey, that's you. That's the episode I wrote about you. That's your. She's designed on your baby picture. That's you." And she just goes, "Yeah, I like Bob's Burgers."
I'd like you all to meet someone. Introducing Ling Bouvier.
Selma, she's beautiful.
This is Homer, your daddy. Without him, I wouldn't have you.
Oh, she likes my eyes. Oh.
Getting to stand against evil, you mentioned earlier your dad with the Moe episode.
Yeah.
And now clearly your dad has an influence on you into your storytelling because you end up with Stand Against Evil.
Yeah, my dad is the largest mountain in my psychic landscape. We had a very, we were roommates as in my childhood. There wasn't a parenting relationship really. I have 4 older brothers and a younger sister. I came from a big family. I was in the middle. I was small. I didn't go along with everybody else. I was kind of on my own little journey, and he couldn't deal. He's an older generation. He's 88 now, and he wasn't the generation of talk to your kids and figure out where they're from. Like, it was like, are you into the thing I'm into? No, all right, then later. And so I had a very contentious relationship with him. But then as I got older, I got to understand him more, and we have a great relationship. But because he, I was just saying, the last time I was home was about 2 months ago, and we were just sitting on watching. Now we watch television together. Like, that's our thing. We don't have to talk. We don't have to look at each other, but we can watch television. And it's funny because I used to have a joke that said the Gould family crest is 2 lions sitting on a couch not talking to each other. And that's basically what ended up. Move your head in Latin on a banner. And or what was it, the other? Death before intimacy was the other one. And oddly, that is what happened. But we watch television together, and we were watching Gran Torino, and watching Gran Torino with my dad is like watching King Kong with a gorilla. And the premise of Stand Against Evil, which was a show I did on IFC, and the premise of it was, what if I just took a horror movie and then put a character in the middle of it that wasn't from the movie? Like, what if I just put the wrong character in a movie? What if on the X-Files, Gillian Anderson was partnered with my dad instead of David Duchovny? But they had to put up with him, and he was that character. And it would change everything. And my brothers and I used to joke when we were little that the ending of King Kong, when all the planes are attacking Kong, we used to say, if our dad was in one of the planes, he would veer off, check the game, fly over Yankee Stadium, get the score, come back, shoot a little bit, fly over again, update the score, land, get a beer, come back, fight him a little bit. It wasn't that he didn't believe in monsters, he just didn't care. And it was originally written as a 7-minute digital thing, and I figured I'd play him in makeup, because I'm friends with Greg Nicotero, and they can do that, and it would just be a really fun thing to do. And then it became Stand Against Evil. But it came from just putting a character into a story that didn't belong there and bending the story around it.
Mommy!
It's okay, sweetie. Mommy's here.
I always hated this thing. It looks like that crap you get at those Renaissance fairs over towards Vermont. You ever go to those things? They are far. But they got themselves a turkey leg. Whoa, doctor. Untie you. Right. There we go.
Thanks.
There you go.
Okay.
So Stan's voice is not just
It's my dad. And most of Stan's funny witticisms, like, don't crap an apple. They're all my dad's.
Well, I guess the apple didn't fall far.
Yeah, that's really good. So, but it was a great exercise, and it's, and I wrote. So then, the story of how it became from a 7-minute thing to I was working on a show that I had just gotten divorced, not to brag, and then I was having dinner with my friend Pete Aronson, who's an executive at IFC, and we were just having dinner because he was a friend of mine, and I was getting divorced, so he was like, "What's going on?" So what happened, and what'd you do? And he said, "You know what you should do is you should write a funny." I remember specifically, he said, like, you should write like a funny X-Files. And I said, that's really weird that you said that. I just did. And I pitched him the idea that I had. And he goes, well, could you change it? There's like 2 things about it that he wanted. I had it, to me, it was a guy and his daughter, and he was an exterminator. And he would go like, the pilot was that, these people had rats in their basement. He went down to their basement and there were just a bunch of vampires hanging upside down from the rafters. And that was the image that I thought would be really funny. But then he was totally blasé. Oh, you got Nosferatus down there. This is going to be a real pain in the ass. And it was like, well, tonight it's going to be dark soon. Yeah, but it's the All-Star game. I can't do anything for you tonight. You're just going to have to lock yourselves in. That was the original idea. And he goes, well, can you make it a workplace show, not a family show? They have these weird, networks have these weird algorithms. And so I went and changed it, and then I went back and I pitched it, and they bought it in the room, which never happens. Like, great, okay, good, write it. And then they just kept forgetting to not make it. That's how it got made. It was just, they just kept forgetting to kill it. And so that's how it got made. But the original idea was, I said, I'll play him in makeup, and we'll do that. And I remember I was in Toronto in a hotel working, doing stand-up. And they called up and they said, so we're going to pick up the show, and you're not going to be the lead because you need a name. And I could hear the 25-year-old me going, forget it. And the 50-year-old me going, that's a great idea. Then we got John McGinley to play the lead, but John was a much younger character than was written. It was very different than what was written. And that was the first time, like, I didn't know, he was signed to do the show. He didn't, we met, but he didn't read. I didn't know what he was gonna do. I had Janet Varney was the co-star. I had written it for Janet, but I had to change the character for John, sort of like when he showed up, because he's, 20, 30 years younger than the character that was written, and he's a very physical, athletic guy. And I got an idea. I told him to grow a beard, and then we'll work backwards from it. And when I saw him, I just said, shave it like Quint. Have like really long sideburns and a mustache and thing, but no beard. And then he shaved it, and then it became, yeah, it's Quint. You're Quint. Quint with a daughter.
I want to talk a little bit about going from writing stand-up and performance comedy to then essentially, going this complete opposite direction to doing something that's incredibly tonal. Like Stan is an incredibly tonal show. It's each episode has, you can feel it, it's an atmospheric show.
Yeah.
So how does that work for you, and how you also give instruction to the people in your room? Because it's not just joke-based for sure.
No, not at all. Well, Stan Against Evil, I wanted it to feel like, again, the tonal stuff is easy because I love horror movies, and so to me it's all almost genetic. Like I've seen everything. I know, I'm not saying I know everything, but I know that world really well. And I can go, oh yeah, it's kind of like Last House on the Left, or it's really like The Night Stalker. Do that. And I wanted it to feel like very New England-y, but I also wanted it to feel like the stuff that I watched as a kid. So I wanted it to have a very 70s kind of feel to it. And the 70s, design-wise was a grotesque era. And a lot of the people that I was working with, when I said like I wanted it to feel like 70s, they came in looking at like the 80s. Like they came in looking at the stuff that they watched as a kid, which is all those 80s horror movies with a lot of neon and bright colors. And I was like, no, you're a decade off. You got to go back. You got to go back. And which is why we had a lot of weird stuff. Like we just had a lot of anachronistic stuff. Like they had a rotary telephone. We had a really brilliant director of photography, oddly named Tim Burton, but not the Tim Burton. But like I said, like I wanted to look like this, and he nailed it. And then the music was a huge part of it too. I wanted it to sound like when I was a kid, there was a show called The Night Gallery that Rod Serling hosted, and my mom used to let me stay up and watch it. And it was terrifying when you're a kid. When you watch it now, you're like, ooh. But I guess when you're 9 and 10, it's very scary. And I wanted it to sound like that. So Eben Schletter, who is our musician, who I've known, he did Mr. Show, and he's like anything that me or my friends did, Eben probably did the music for, because we're just a social group. It's like we need a musician, we'll call Eben. He's at my house. And he was brilliant, and he was just like, oh, like this, and it's like, yes, it's exactly like that.
So you had talked about how some of your real life ends up in these, especially with The Simpsons.
It's the only way. It's the only way you can. Whatever you write will end up in there, whether you know it or not. Everything I write ends up being about my relationship with my father, or what have you. Stephen King said a great thing. He was saying, I wrote this book called The Langoliers about an alien race that comes to Earth. And they make you smarter and stronger and faster, but you die sooner. And the way you know that you're starting to die is that you start to have these uncontrollable nosebleeds. That's the first sign of it. And I didn't realize until long after I had written it and published it that I was writing about my cocaine addiction. And I was like, yeah. It's all in there. It's gonna come out. I remember seeing Life of Brian when I was like 14 years old, 15 years old. And when the aliens came down, my head exploded. Like I couldn't, because it didn't end the movie. It didn't, but it was so unexpected. It was revelatory. And I do that as a writer, like when a character does something completely in opposition to their motive. There's a point, the best book about screenwriting I've ever written is called, it's a terrible title, How to Write Screenplays That Sell, which is a gross, shabby title. But it's written by Hal Ackerman, who ran the screenwriting lab at UCLA. And there's a point that he calls point Hache. I don't know, it's an anagram for something, but it's at the midpoint of the second act. And in a lot of screenplays, at the midpoint of the second act, and I really get into the engineering and the architecture of how a good story works. And I can be in a movie and I can like see a big plot turn and I'll look, yep, we're at 23 minutes because this is when the first act ends. And point Hache is when the hero of the movie does something totally contrary to their motivation to achieve their goal. And it's in The Godfather. It's when Michael tells his fiance's father, I'm really Michael Corleone. I'm here because I killed a guy. And he reveals his secret. And there's something about Mary. Like you can track it in all of these movies. And when you get stuck, it's like, well, what if he did the opposite of what he's supposed to do? And I love those big surprises in a screenplay.
You've been watching A Conversation with Dana Gould on Story. On Story is part of a growing number of programs in Austin Film Festival's On Story project, including the On Story PBS series, now streaming online, the On Story radio program, the On Story podcast, and the On Story book series, available where books are sold. To find out more about On Story and Austin Film Festival, visit onstory.tv or austinfilmfestival.com.